Welcome back. Today we are concluding element 20, maximizing your anti-inflammatory protection. Okay, so we've been talking about inflammation all week, right? And what it causes and how bad it is really for us. I listened to a webinar recently that really corroborated all that I shared with you this week from Dr. A in both the Lifebook and the Habits of Health book. So this webinar that I recently attended was by Tom O'Brien, and he had a session about autoimmune disease and stated that inflammation is at the root of practically all disease and the most significant cause of death in the world today. Sound familiar? That's something that we talked about yesterday, right? When I was going through those other two books. So systemic chronic inflammation. What can I do to reduce inflammation? So he actually says that inflammation is involved in 8 of the top 10 causes of death in the US today. 8 of the 10. The only two that were not were acute trauma, which is think car accident or fall, and suicide. Everything else is chronic inflammatory issues. The accumulation of inflammation that fuels the fire and causes the eventual dysfunction of, let's say, your thyroid, right? And you get hypothyroidism, or your liver, and now you can't break down alcohol very well, or your joints, and you're waking up stiff in the morning, or it's hard to walk because your knee is inflamed. I knew that. You know, inflammation is fueling the fire for these conditions. So, what is the path of development for chronic inflammation disease? Right now, we know inflammation is a mechanism, but how does it develop? Where does it come from? He actually, Tom O'Brien actually talked about how all inflammation begins in the gut, and we have control over what we eat. So there's this growing evidence that gut permeability, your immune system response, and the gut microbiome, together with genetic predisposition and exposure to environmental triggers, make for this perfect storm for chronic inflammation or inflammatory disease. So interesting, right? So chronic inflammation disease, it develops over time. It's not like, oh, I ate this and now I have this chronic inflammation disease. It's elevated antibodies and you're killing off more cells than you're making. And you may not have symptoms yet, but eventually you will. And he goes on to say that diagnosis typically comes 6 to 12 months after the symptoms, right? So think about it. You're not feeling well, you're feeling sick, you go to the doctors, and then they have to run tests and it takes time. So 6 to 12 months after the symptoms start is typically when there's a diagnosis. So as you start to understand this and you start to learn how to dial down the inflammation by reducing the triggers. His last premise is that these environmental exposures actually influence the risk of developing autoimmune disease. And people like to say, like I did, it's genetics. 30% is what they're finding is genetics. Okay, 30%. However, 70% is due to environmental factors, toxic chemicals, dietary components, gut dysbiosis, what we're eating. Okay, they activate the immune system. Yes, genetic vulnerability is there, but you can identify those triggers and you can counteract it. All right, that's the important thing that I want you to take home. Okay, from everything that we've learned from Dr. A's books, corroborated with other things that, from science that we're hearing, this is all based on facts, science. Okay. So wanted to share that with you. Please take a look at that. Dive into your life book and the Habits of Health book. It's incredibly important. I want you to be here for a long time. Okay. So thank you for joining me as we conclude another element of your life book. Yay. So I am really looking forward to sharing with you next week, next time. We're actually going to be doing element 21, which is, do you need a supplement? Okay. So please feel free, like, comment, share the post, hop on over to the YouTube channel called Healthy and Vibrant. And I look forward to seeing you next time.